The champagne flowed freely, bubbling over the rims of crystal flutes, as the city's elite mingled in Vincent Blake's penthouse. The sprawling view of New York City stretched out below, a sea of glittering lights. His 35th birthday celebration was nothing short of legendary, a gathering of the wealthy, the beautiful, and the influential. The kind of party people would talk about for weeks. Vincent Blake stood at the center of it all, a charismatic force in a perfectly tailored midnight blue suit. His dark hair was slicked back, his smile as polished as the leather of his Italian shoes. He moved through the crowd like a seasoned politician, shaking hands, exchanging witty banter, and charming everyone in his path. "Vincent, darling," a sultry voice purred behind him. He turned to see Isabella, a stunning model he had dated briefly last year, draped in a figure-hugging gown. "Isabella," he said smoothly, kissing her on both cheeks. "You look incredible, as always." "And you look content," she teased, her eyes scanning the room. "Where's your latest conquest?" Vincent chuckled, raising his glass of bourbon. "Taking the night off. Tonight's about celebrating life, not chasing it." Isabella laughed and leaned in closer. "Careful, Vincent. People might start to think you're finally settling down." "Let them think what they want," he replied, his smile never faltering. But as the night wore on, Vincent found himself retreating to the edge of the party, standing alone on his balcony. The city stretched out before him, endless and alive, yet somehow it felt hollow. The voices from inside faded, replaced by the quiet hum of the streets below. "Some party," a familiar voice said, breaking his reverie. Vincent turned to see Rachel, his oldest and closest friend. She wasn't like the others. She didn't fawn over him or play into his charm. Rachel was the one person who could see through the polished exterior to the man beneath. "You're hiding," she said, handing him a fresh glass of bourbon. "Not hiding," he replied. "Just reflecting." Rachel smirked. "That's a first." "Ha ha," Vincent said dryly. Rachel leaned against the balcony railing, studying him. "You know, you're not as good at this as you think you are." "At what?" "This whole man of mystery thing," she said. "Everyone in there thinks you've got it all figured out, but I know you, Vince. You're restless." Vincent didn't respond right away. He took a sip of his drink, the amber liquid burning his throat in the best way. "Do you ever feel like—" he began, then stopped. "Like what?" Rachel prompted. "Like something's missing," he said finally. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Coming from the man who's dated half the women in this city, that's rich." Vincent laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "Exactly. I've dated 100 women, Rachel. 100. And yet here I am, standing on my balcony, wondering why I feel empty." Rachel studied him for a moment, her expression softening. "Maybe it's because you've spent so much time chasing the idea of love that you've forgotten what it actually looks like." The words hit him harder than he expected. He turned back to the city, the weight of her observation settling over him. "You've got everything, Vince," Rachel said gently. "The money, the looks, the charm, but none of that means anything if you're not happy." Vincent didn't answer. He just stared out at the city, the noise of the party behind him fading further into the background. For the first time in his life, Vincent Blake, New York's most eligible bachelor, the man who had everything, felt truly alone. The morning after the party, Vincent Blake woke up to the sound of his phone vibrating incessantly on his nightstand. He groaned, rubbing his temples as the sharp sting of last night's bourbon reminded him of his overindulgence. The penthouse was eerily quiet, the silence a stark contrast to the roaring laughter and music from the night before. He reached for his phone, squinting at the screen. Notifications flooded in, social media tags, text messages, and emails, all praising the spectacular bash. Yet none of it mattered. Vincent tossed the phone aside and stared at the ceiling. Rachel's words from the night before echoed in his mind. "You've spent so much time chasing the idea of love that you've forgotten what it actually looks like." He couldn't shake it. Pushing himself out of bed, Vincent made his way to the kitchen, where his housekeeper Maria was already brewing coffee. "Morning, Mr. Blake," she said warmly, setting a steaming mug on the counter. Morning, he mumbled, taking a sip. Maria watched him for a moment before speaking. Rough night? You could say that. Maria raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. She'd worked for Vincent long enough to know when to let him be. As he sat at the counter, nursing his coffee, Vincent's mind drifted to the women he had dated over the years. 100 names, 100 faces.
There was Chloe, the Broadway actress with a laugh that could light up a room. They'd met at a gala and spent a whirlwind 6 months together before their schedules tore them apart. Then there was Emily, the philanthropist with a heart of gold. She'd wanted to build a life with him, but Vincent had been too focused on his business empire to give her the time she deserved. And, of course, Sophia, the fiery Italian model who had matched his energy and charisma at every turn. Their relationship had been passionate but volatile, burning out as quickly as it began. Each memory brought a pang of regret, not because the relationships ended, but because Vincent had never truly allowed himself to connect with any of them. He finished his coffee and pulled out his laptop. If he was going to figure out what was missing from his life, he needed to start by understanding the choices that led him here. Later, that day, Vincent decided to meet Rachel for lunch at their favorite cafe downtown. She was the only person he trusted to help him make sense of his thoughts. "You're quiet today," Rachel said as she sipped her iced tea. Vincent poked at his salad with a fork. "Just thinking." "About?" "Everything," he admitted. "My life, my choices, the women I've dated." Rachel smirked. "That's quite the list." Vincent shot her a look. "I'm serious, Rachel. I've dated so many women, and yet I've never felt like any of it mattered." Rachel set her glass down and leaned forward. "Do you even know what you're looking for, Vince?" He hesitated. "I thought I did. I wanted someone who could keep up with me, someone who fit into my world. And every time I thought I'd found her, it fell apart," he said. "Maybe I'm the problem." Rachel smiled softly. "You're not the problem, Vince. You're just looking in the wrong places." Vincent leaned back in his chair, her words sinking in. "So where do I start?" Rachel took a moment before answering. "Start by figuring out what you really want. Not what looks good on paper or what impresses other people. What do you want?" Flashbacks of love. That night, Vincent sat in his study, flipping through an old photo album. Each picture told a story. A vacation in the Maldives, a gala in Paris, a quiet dinner in the Hamptons. He paused on a photo of him and Chloe, laughing under the city lights. She'd been so full of life, always encouraging him to take a step back and enjoy the moment. Then there was Emily, her arm linked with his as they volunteered at a charity event. She'd been the first woman to show him what it meant to give without expecting anything in return. Finally, he found a picture of Sophia, her fiery gaze locked with his. She'd challenged him in ways no one else ever had, pushing him to be better even when he didn't want to hear it. As he stared at the photos, Vincent realized that each of these women had brought something unique into his life. Yet, he had let them slip away, too caught up in his own ego to recognize their value. The turning point. The next morning, Vincent woke up with a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in years. He didn't want to be the man who lived his life collecting fleeting moments. He wanted something real, something lasting. He picked up his phone and dialed Rachel. "Rachel, I need your help," he said as soon as she answered. "With what?" "Finding myself," he said simply. Rachel was silent for a moment before responding. "It's about time." The next phase of Vincent Blake's life began not with a grand gesture, but with small, deliberate changes. He realized that the playboy lifestyle, which had once seemed so alluring, was nothing more than a distraction from what he truly wanted, meaning and connection. Rachel had always been Vincent's compass, and she agreed to help him navigate this new chapter. They started with what Rachel called the basics. "Vince, If you're going to figure out who you are and what you want, you need to strip away the noise, she said during one of their planning sessions. What do you mean by noise? Vincent asked, raising an eyebrow. All the distractions, the parties, the flashy purchases, the endless dating. You need to take a step back from all of it. Vincent grimaced but nodded. He wasn't sure how to start, but he trusted Rachel. Cutting the noise. Vincent began by canceling the constant stream of events that filled his calendar. Charity galas, networking parties, and high society gatherings were put on hold. The biggest change came when he decided to spend more time at his lake house, far from the glitz and glamour of the city. The house, nestled in the woods, had always been a retreat he rarely used. Now it became his sanctuary. The first few days were strange. Vincent wasn't used to the quiet. He missed the hum of the city, the constant notifications on his phone, and the flurry of activity that had defined his life. But slowly, he began to appreciate the stillness. Continue,